Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today, Making Your Orchestrations Effective in 2022 and Beyond. So just a quick introduction. I'm Brian Rose. I'm the Director of Digital Transformation here at Terillium. I've been around the JDE space for about 10, 11 years now. Started as a manufacturing resource and have been very fortunate to have been involved with a lot of implementations that are leveraging the new UX1 technologies. I remember when Orchestrator came out in the 2014, 2015 days. So have been leveraging those tools for a long, long time. Just some quick housekeeping. So as I'm going through this, everyone is on mute, but if you do have any questions, please feel free to put those in the question box. I'll be checking those periodically throughout the session. If we're at a good stopping point, I'll go ahead and answer them, but if not, I'll wait till the end and get to everyone's questions. For those of you, very quickly, just a little sales pitch. If you don't know Terillium, we've been around a long time. We've been doing JD Edwards forever. We do implementations, upgrades. We've seen tons and tons of organizations looking to enhance the UX1 functionality, so we do assessments. So if you ever need any support, please feel free to reach out to us. Now, from today's agenda's perspective, so we're going to be going through really three main areas. So the first one is going to be a high-level overview of Orchestrator. So I know Orchestrator's been around for a bit, but there are people that don't have a ton of exposure to it. So I'm going to be going through each of the components, making sure that we kind of set the foundation, what Orchestrator is. I'll then be talking about what some of the new features that have come out with Release 22 in relation to Orchestrator. And then finally, I'll be doing a demonstration of that Orchestrator functionality inside of E1. I'm going to try my best to spend more time on the demonstration than boring you guys in PowerPoint, just because I think that's a little bit more valuable and better use of your time. So what is the Orchestrator? This is a kind of a high-level understanding. It's leveraging that application interface level to integrate, automate, extend your business processes, whether it's inside of E1 or externally to E1, whether it's from an interface or getting a flat file or whatever it may be. And what's awesome about it is it utilizes kind of that digital gold that E1 has built into it. So the situations to where you're going to enter in a sales order and you put in a wrong customer number, right? Orchestrator knows that's an incorrect customer number. So all those checks and balances and code that was written for the end user from a JD Edwards perspective is leveraged by the Orchestrator. This is really just a kind of a quick visualization of how some people leverage it. So like I talked about, it can be used as somewhat of a middleware tool where you're gathering data, whether it's from IoT devices, integrations from a JDE to a CRM, JDE to an e-commerce, supplier portal, whatever it might be. But where we're seeing more and more people leveraging it is kind of internally to JD Edwards. So automating processes inside of the four walls of the software. So notifying me when an inventory shortage happens and kicking some actions in play in the background. So all of that automation can be built out inside of the Orchestrator tool. Now, this is a great representation, once again, just to kind of show the continuous improvement of Orchestrator. So for those of you that are on the latest release, obviously you have all the great, neat features, but getting involved inside of the Orchestrator framework is one thing to where you're going to be able to build as the different technologies and solutions come out. I remember when we started leveraging it, you couldn't add a button to a page and kick off an orchestration. You couldn't consume an Excel document. You weren't able to do any types of triggers inside of the system. Process recorder wasn't there, so it's just continuously being improved over time. And it seems like every time new releases come out, I'm always shocked in what type of features have come. And it talks a little bit here about some of the planned activities versus what's in research. So these are some of the Oracle related content of what they're planning to do from these are not all orchestrator centric, but a lot of them are in terms of how we can, improve the user interface, the user automation inside of E1. So it's being continuously innovated throughout the period of time. Now, when we get into the overview of the orchestrator, okay, and I'm just going to jump through kind of each of these boxes individually from a high level, so everyone's clear of what these are. I'm going to skip over the ones that are specifically related to Release 22 because I'll dive into those a little bit deeper in the upcoming slides. So orchestrations, and the way that I always like to explain an orchestration is it's really the home. Without any of the components, your family, your furniture, your dogs, it doesn't really do anything, right? It's just the house. The components of the Orchestrator Studio are what allow the process to be kicking off different actions. So things like form requests and data requests, those icons in green are our components. So to go through each of those just quickly, so a form request is like me going to an application as an end user and querying on data or entering in data. Example, if I want to go in and enter a sales order, that is going to be done via a form request. I'm going to first go to 4210. I'm going to click the add button. It's going to bring me to the header. I'm going to put in all my detailed information. Then it'll bring me to the grid, blah, 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 right? That is considered a form request. The next one is a data request. So a data request is me pulling data from a table or a view. And a lot of times it's to allow me to use that information in an earlier step of your orchestration or in a later step of your orchestration from whatever your inputs are. So if I want to go and find the primary supplier for a specific item, or I want to go and check how much inventory I have of an item, or how much is on hold, or how much is on order from a PO perspective, those would be situations to where you would leverage the data request functionality. Next one is reports. So reports are what you would imagine they are. It's you running a UBE, R31410 work order processing. You can pass in different versions, which is one of the new things that has come out in the newer releases. In the past, there was always struggles because every organization has tons and tons of versions of their UBEs, and they wanted to be able to pass, hey, for this specific employee or branch or situation, use version X versus version Y. You can now do that with the newer release of Orchestrator, and this is where you're kicking off those applications. Watch list is you kicking off an orchestration based on a watch list trigger, so something gets to a specific level, it turns red, it turns bold, whatever it may be. Attachments I'm going to skip over because that's somewhat new from a Release 22 perspective. Connectors is you connecting to a third-party type of area. So example, I'm connecting to a third-party database. I'm connecting to a third-party FTP. Those are areas where I can connect to different data sets to allow me to either consume information from that data set or ultimately pass information over to that data set. The skip logic extensions, again, because that's new. Custom request, this has been in there for a long time. This is if you want to do, if there's a situation where the standard functionality out of the box doesn't give you what you're looking for, you can leverage these custom requests and do, there's different coding languages. Groovy is the one that's been talked about. JRuby is coming out a little bit more. So this is if you want to get really in the code. I don't feel we have a lot of organizations that at least we work with that go down this path. Orchestrator out of the box does give a lot of functionality. Messages, this is just an email. So if I want to kick out an email, and I'll show you an example of one of these later on. If I want to kick out an email when a certain situation happens and I want to attach a document to it or a URL or whatever it might be. If I want to print a PO and have the PO be attached and sent to the vendor, that can all be done via the message function inside of the Orchestrator Studio. Rules are ultimately a true-false. So if you want to say based on a specific situation, go this way in the orchestration, based on a different situation, go another way, that would be done via a rule. Cross-reference, we don't see all that often. This is if the example would be if you have a forklift that's has a serial number 345, but in the asset field in JD Edwards, it's 789. And you want to just relate the two. Think of it like the P4104 cross-reference in JD Edwards, but it's for the orchestrator. It's just a relationship more than anything. Whitelist, once again, we don't see that one all that often. That's from a security perspective. We usually use different firewalls and DMZs to make it secure without leveraging without leveraging those whitelists. And then schedules is the last kind of component. So this is allowing me to schedule orchestration. So when we think of how do we kick off an orchestration, there's multiple ways that you can do it. One is via a schedule. So you can say, hey, I want to run this every hour, Monday through Friday. Or I could say, I want to run it 3 days a week at 7:30. You can do all that from a scheduling perspective. The other trigger is, an action. So like most of you have probably seen before, you can, based on a click inside of JD Edwards, actually go and kick off a specific action. So those are really the two ways that you can kick off an orchestration, and those are all those components, right? So these components are what comprise your orchestration. So a lot of times when you build out orchestrations, you're going to use multiple components. You may say, I first want to go and grab a specific value from a table, and then I want to use that value and pass it into a report, pass it into the data selection of the report, and then that report gets consumed and put in a message and sent out to a vendor, right? So the way that you build out this functionality is by coupling all these different components together to give the functionality that is needed for you from an organizational perspective. On the bottom, these are just some more of the kind of tools that you can leverage while you're building orchestration. So you can test off orchestrations. Obviously, there's a hyperlink to get an E1. The Orchestration Monitor is great if you are, trying to determine what's going on with your orchestrations. That's usually done more from I would say, a production standpoint. When you're testing, what the area is right away, right? It pops right in your face. Whereas when, it's in production, there's times where it's happening in the background. You want to be notified. That's where that Orchestration Monitor comes into play. All of these can be imported or exported into different environments, and then connections is kind of working with those connectors. It's the handshake between the database and the FTP and the username and credentials and those types of things. So these three kind of highlighted features are some of the new, or at least there's new features within them that have come out with Release 22. So workflows, logic extensions, and finally the attachments. So just going through each of these kind of quickly. So the workflow tool has been around forever, so some developers, if there's any developers on this call, have seen the old workflow tool you have to get to back on the FAT client. It was very difficult to use and promote and test. What was done was now this has been brought to the glass. So now I can get into my Orchestration Studio and utilize the same type of features that were leveraged in that backend tool, just more of a user-friendly type of interface. So these can be, the current ones can be changed. You can create new ones. So this is great for situations to where you want to kick a specific process into the workflow tool when a situation happens. Let's say we have a onboarding of a employee and they need a computer. So they put in a request for a computer, and that needs to be approved before it can be sent to the buying group and all that good stuff. So we can leverage workflow to have a situation where when a new request comes in, automatically kick a workflow to the person who is their manager, and then run through and create the PO. So workflows, once again, it's leveraging kind of the older technology that's been there for a bit, but bringing it to a more usable feature from an end user's perspective. So logic extensions, this is so powerful in terms of the opportunity that we have with this tool. So this really allows you to do true JD Edwards development without needing to do true JD Edwards development, right? So table IOs and loops and all of those custom logic that, a lot of times we build into the background of a button or a click or a business function, that all can be done with logic extensions now, right? So the big value there is, all of the mods you may do in JDE does impact upgrades and allows you to move to the next, the newer, greater release by leveraging logic extensions. With that being a UDO, those move up just like anything else. So there's no impact to any upgrades or anything that you're doing moving forward. And I'll show you an example of one of these once we get into the demonstration later on. And the final one, and this is one of the ones that I actually really like too, is the better management of attachments and document management. So the orchestrator now can do things like grab all attachments from a specific record, or even update attachments from a specific record. I can bring out a flat file. I can go and do a data request and pull out a zipped flat file, or pull out a Excel, whatever it might be. So the management of documents, attachments, flat files has become really, really awesome with the newer release. And once again, I'll show you an example of this as we move forward. Here's a quick little list of some of the other kind of notable features that I feel are pretty powerful. The first one is you now can add an environment in your orchestration. So in the past, you pretty much had to work in whatever environment was linked to that Orchestrator Studio. Now you can actually pass in an environment. We talked a little bit about the file input and output. So in the past, you had to only use an FTP. Now you can drop files directly into Orchestrator and skip that FTP, which is really nice. Launching orchestrations from a composed page. This one's really cool as well. I can drop a button on a page, allow me to put in some inputs, and then pass back values based on what that orchestration is looking for. Pop-up messages is another cool one. So this is giving the user kind of immediate feedback when they kick off an orchestration of what's going on. So if I want to know how many records were processed, or I want to know specific information around an inventory count, whatever that might be, those can all be popped back to the user in real time in the glass, which is awesome. There's a lot more out there, right? I'm just going through some of the high level features. So I would recommend get on Learn JDE and kind of follow the announcements as they come out. They do a great job of showing the feature and also having step throughs of how to actually leverage it. So if you're in a situation you're wondering, hey, I don't know how to do this, it's an awesome resource. All right, so from today's perspective, from a demonstration, I'm going to go through a couple examples. One's going to be generating a work order where I attach a document to it. So let's say I'm creating a work order, service work order, and I have attached a document of the failure, and I want to be able to send that failure to a supervisor in an email, right, and have it automatically attach that image. I'll show you an example of how you can do that. The next one is going to be talking about how we can add those pop-up buttons to a composed page. So looking to see what type of inventory availability do I have for an item. The third one is around flat file generation. So one, how do I generate a flat file externally to JDE, and also talking about kind of attachments, media documents. How can I add an attachment to a sales order? I'll show you a logic extension around kind of a payroll increase. And then finally, there's some new process recording features around how, I know it always drove me nuts, but when you're doing a process recording and a warning pops up, right, you have to click the double OK, then you got to go in and remove it. That has been remediated with the newer release. So lots and lots of cool stuff. And then for those of you that were on the initial R22 release that Dan and I did a couple of weeks ago, some of these are going to be similar, but the difference is today we're actually going to build them out. So I want to show you the back end of how some of these work, so you can, have the ability to build these out yourself in your own environment, or say, hey, this is a use case that I have, but you'll have all the information you need to ultimately do that. All right, so like I said, I don't want to spend a ton of time inside of PowerPoint. So let's jump over to E1. Okay. So I'm jumping into the Orchestrator Studio, and once again, based on your release from a tools perspective, this may look very different. This release that I'm showing is the release 22. This is the one that came out just before the end of the year, so there are some new features. Now, it doesn't change kind of the user interface in any way, but there are some new features that we don't have in this current environment, so looking forward to getting my hands on those. But if I come in and go to my orchestration, so like I said, the first example we're going to work through is a situation where I want to be able to retrieve information from a work order and then send a attachment of a picture of a failure or whatever it might be when I create an order to the supervisor, so they can look at it, understand what the problem is, and then remediate and determine what the next steps are. So I'm going to jump in here to my orchestrations, and I'll show you the example first. I'll run through it from the one that was built out, and then we'll actually build it together. Okay, so send work order, and like we talked about earlier, right? These orchestrations are normally built of multiple components. So the first one I have here is me going in and doing a data request. So I'm going and pulling data from a specific table with the information that I want to put inside of an email. Okay, so if I were to jump into this into this data request, what you're going to notice is I am looking at the 4801, which is the work order header table, and I'm pulling back some key information, right? So I'm pulling back, or I'm querying on my order number, and then I'm pulling back what that order number is, the description, my manager, my asset number, my originator number. One of the things too, with the release 22 perspective that is new, is this guy right here. So these associated descriptions, love these. So for these examples where I have the manager, but I'd also love to know what the actual name is, right, versus just a number. This is what that associated description is doing. Same thing with asset number and originator number. So manager number may be 6001, right? And that's Brian Rose. Instead of it just pulling back and saying, hey, this is 6001, it's going to bring back the associated description as well. So small little update, but it is awesome in terms of bringing back and not having to go to multiple tables to get that type of information. So I'm going in, grabbing my specific data from this table, and then I'm going to go ahead and send an email. So inside of this email, you can send it to an address book record, a who's who, a dispatch list, whatever you want. For today, I'm just putting it in as B Rose at Trillium to make it easier. The subject and the detail, you can see there's some syntax in here, and these values are what I'm grabbing from that data request. So I'm grabbing all the information that I need for me to be able to pass that over to my message outside of the system. And this is where I'm going and actually adding that attachment. So what you're going to see in here is it has the attachment structure name. So if you ever go to an attachment inside of E1, you're able to see where the structure name is of that attachment. So work order header, the structure name is GT4801A. And what I'm saying is grab the first attachment that is an image. I could say grab all attachments that are images, or grab just the text attachments, or grab just the URLs, or whatever you may want it to be, right? So this is going to go ahead and grab that data based on what my requirements are. So I'm passing this through, I'm allowing it to say, hey, this is my work order information, these are my piece of equipment, my originator, and my actual attachment. So let's go ahead and I'll show you how we can test this. So if we test this, so it reloads. All right, so we're going to put in 453376. Run this. So what this is showing me is all of the information that I have in that data request, right? My order number, my description, my originator. Remember we talked about that associated description. So you can see in here, it's associating these descriptions for all of these. And if I were to come over now to my email, let's go here. You'll see it sent me this email with work order information, all of those key values, and also this attachment. So this attachment is what was attached to the actual work order. So when I created that work order, I added this attachment to show maybe the work that I was doing, right? Or the failure that had possibly happened. So giving me that quick way to determine, hey, this is the problem, this is what they're working on, I see this is something we fixed in the past, so let's go ahead and fix it the same way, whatever it might be. But with the newer release, once again, you're able to grab those attachments directly from an order and pass those into an email, which is awesome. Because, you know, every place that I know that I go from an implementation perspective, attachments is used very, very heavily. You know, so by giving the end users the ability to manage those and push those outside of the system just makes it, you know, that much easier. All right. So the next one we're going to build out, and I'm actually going to build this one with you, but I want to show it to you first. It slides over. All right, and I think it's refreshing. 1 second. Okay, so this right here, and once again, for those of you that were on the call we had earlier, or sorry, a couple of weeks ago, this is something that I showed you guys, but I didn't really show you how to build it out. And that's what I want to show you today, because I think this is very, very powerful. And it doesn't just have to be for a check. It could be to actually go and do an update, release something from back order, cut a PO, whatever it might be, right? So if I come in here and I do, this is for an inventory search, and I put in an inventory item in a branch plant, I can run it, and you'll see it brings back that specific information. So let's say I want to go and actually build this out inside of an orchestration. Now, the first thing that I'm going to do is go ahead and record a process. So inventory availability, one of the tricky things is the available calculation is not really in a table, right? It's looking at a business function, which is saying, hey, based on hand and committed and all the, you know, all that good stuff, this is what your available is. So you can't just go to a table in certain situations to grab that. But the one way around that is by leveraging a form request. So I can actually go into this form request, item availability, pull all that information that I need, and still be able to utilize it. Okay, so let's first record a process. I'm going to put in 2009, find, and you'll see it brings back these key values. So all I'm going to do is come in and say, I want to return this, this, and this. So on hand, committed, and available. Okay, zoom, stop. Call this Brian's inventory query. Save that. Okay. So once you've saved that, let's go ahead back here, sign out. I'm going to go into my requests. So here is my information, right? So I have my item number, I have my find, and then I have my brand or my returning of my data. If I wanted to add a branch in here, I could certainly do that. But for this situation, I'm just going to keep it at the item number. So now that I've built this out via that form request, let's associate this into an orchestration. So I'll click Create Orchestration. And I love this too. I know it wasn't released in 22, but the fact that now you can generate your orchestration directly from a service request or a form request or whatever it might be is awesome. And you'll see it also does some of that mapping as well. So really, really cool feature. So now I've gone in, I have created my query, I've associated my mapping, I'm ready to go. Okay, so let's save this. Out. All right, so let's go in and we'll just use this same page here. So to add these, all we do is go to Manage Content, Compose Pages. And just like if you were adding a UBE, a interactive application, it's just another tile, okay? So I can come in and click Add. It'll say, what type of tile do I want? I'm gonna say Orchestration. And inventory query. You'll see save. Save it. And there it is, right? Simple as that. So it's very, very easy to build out and gives you that quick information based on what you're looking for. This was a situation where I'm just looking at, item availability, but it doesn't have to be that simplistic. It could be, I want to, once again, generate a PO from here or create a work order from here, release a sales order from a back order, or off of hold, or whatever it might be. All of that can be done within these buttons, which is really, really cool. All right, so we've talked to two of the newer features. One was around, the management or attaching those attachments to emails. This one was me kicking off orchestration specifically from a E1 page. And then now we're going to jump into more of the attachment kind of based flat files. How can I generate a flat file? How can I generate a attachment inside of JDE on a specific record? Things along that nature. And I think I do have some questions. So let me just pause and see if we've got a couple, or just not sure how easy it is to see these. Can we see an example of an API being built in Orchestrator to insert data into JDE? So, Alex, when we say the example of an API being built, so every one of these orchestrations at the end of the day is an API. So every orchestration that I build in Orchestrator Studio can be hit as an endpoint API. And that's one of the beauties of it is I don't have to do a ton of crazy customization to create an endpoint. If I want an endpoint which creates a work order or updates a work order, you create an orchestration, and then you can expose that to anyone who has, the credentials to hit it from an API perspective. So every single orchestration at the end of the day is an API. And the way that you hit them is just based on the specific naming convention you have for that record. All right, so now let's get into some of those attachment-based orchestrations. All right, so the two I'm going to be talking about today are going to be this one here, first of all, and then this one here. So generating an Excel file. So this is a generation of a CSV, a zip, whatever you may want it to be, to get it either from a third-party system or externally to a third-party system. So for this example, this is showing me all of the sales orders that were created today. And I want to be able to generate a flat file for this situation. You can go across all different areas. So if I want to see all the work or all the items that were updated today, because I have to send it to my PLM system to make sure I have them all in sync, right? Something like that can be done. If I need to grab all the cost changes because I'm using an MES, then I need to be able to grab that information and pass it to the MES. These are perfect examples of if it's a flat file type of integration of how you would do that. So jumping into this, and what's great is they're fairly straightforward, right? So the first thing I'm doing is a data request, and we've talked about these over and over again, but a data request is me going in and saying, hey, I am pulling this data based on this filter criteria from a specific table. So I'm saying order date is equal to today, and I'm grabbing my order company number, description, type, line number, and then all of these associated descriptions inside of this specific sales order. And when I go in and actually generate it, all I have to do is inside of my outputs, there's two key areas you want to make sure that you have selected. So the first one here, where it says output grid to a file, okay? So make sure when you're going and trying to do this, you go in and say that you want to output the grid to the file, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to have it be processed. You can determine what is the type of output. So once you've said, I have the specific output that I want to leverage, I want it to be a CSV, then you can move over to the files, and you'll see it'll give me the drop down and say, here's the file name, F4211 orders today file name. I want to respond in a single file. Okay, so I want to grab this data and have it be a single file. I could grab multiple files and zip them together. So you can see in here, there is this response is a zip file. So if I needed to drop a zip file for a specific integration, you have that ability as well. It's really just dependent on kind of what your needs are from a middleware type of perspective. So I've gone through, I've said, these are the items, or sorry, the sales orders that I want to search on. This is the file type and the type of file that I want to generate. Now, if I come in here and click the run button, I'm just going to show you. This one's wide open because I'm just doing it based on today's date. But if I run this, down here at the bottom, you're going to see it dropped a file. And I could go in and take a look at it. So if I come to this, you'll see it's showing that information in a file. So let's jump back to Orchestrator. So the generation of a flat file, very, very simple. I go in, I generate a data request, Then I leverage that file technology or that file output to say what type of file do I want it to be, and then finally, where do I want to drop it to? Is it on an FTP? Is it in a specific directory? Blah, blah, blah. All that can absolutely be done. Now, the next piece is around this adding of an attachment. Okay, so this is that attachment button or that attachment component that I was talking about earlier. So inside of this attachment component, there's all different types of ways that you can generate, either add, update, pull the list of attachments, download the attachments to whatever your heart is content. You can see these are all those actions that you have, and they're based on that specific structure name, similar to what we did earlier, right, when we were adding it to the attachment. This is the structure name for this specific attachment, and these are the values that I need to put in to have that key relationship with where I'm going to be dropping this specific information. So going through this, you can see this is the structure. I'm doing an add, meaning I want to add an attachment. You could do a header attachment. You could do a detail line attachment. You could add multiple attachments. You're going to say, what type of attachment is this? So this is a text attachment. And then think of this as the attachment name, and this is the attachment detail. Okay, so attachment name, attachment detail. When I go to add it, this is what is going to be populated inside of that header. All right, so let's go ahead and just once again very quickly show how we could build something like this out. So add text attachment. New text attachment. This is going to be GT42 on A. So it'll automatically bring the keys in. I say this is going to be an add. I'm going to be adding a text attachment. And then I'm just going to call the top one attachment. And then this one will be my syntax. New work text. Add in my sequence. So now that I've added that, I can then grab this information, add it to my orchestration, auto map it over. Oh, and save it. So just like that, I've created an orchestration which can grab information from wherever that you want and allow me to generate an attachment. So if I were to come in, click the run button. Let's see, get my order information. So we'll do 157 or 154708. SO. Oh, hello to 0. Hello, Brian. And we run it. You can see it ran. Come over to E1. There we go, just like that. So in a matter of 2-3 minutes, you can see how quickly something like this can be built out. It's really pretty impressive how you can manipulate and automate simple things in a matter of minutes. It's not days and days of development. It's very, very simple. So that was going through more of the attachment type of functionality, whether it was outbound flat files, inbound flat files, managing attachments from a creation, update, deletion, download, all of that can be done in the 22 release. This next, just quick example, and I don't have the time, unfortunately, to go through all of the pieces of this logic extension, but ultimately what this is doing is kind of showing a cost of living adjustment and what's going to happen if I increased my cost of living by 3%, or with the COVID inflation by 8-9%, whatever it might be. You can build out these logic extensions, which does all different types of calculations. It's just like you can see, there's if else's, there's assignment blocks, there's fetches. All of that can be done inside of these logic extensions. So a great way to kind of build out different calculations inside of E1. So by me testing this, you'll kind of see, I'm going to come in here and we'll run this. Let's do a 5% increase. I'm going to do a different company. Let's do 0.20. 1, 2, 3. There we go. It'd be good if I typed in the right number. So you'll see it gives me how many employees do I have, what's my current total company salary, what's the proposed company increase, and then also what is the proposed company salary overall. So all of these pieces of logic or math can be done, and the value here is now you can use this for actions in the future, right? If I want to do all these calculations and then kick off an orchestration to go do something, that is, kind of where that magic comes in. So a lot of the development, customizations, and triggers that you've built out inside of business functions to do certain logic calculations and loops and all that good stuff now can be done inside of the Orchestrator Studio, which is really, really cool. All right, so we've gone through a bunch of different scenarios, and things that have some value inside of the newer 22 release. For me, I really like the attachment functionality. I think that's a huge win just in how attachments are managed. They've always been tricky in the past, so I think that's great. And then logic extensions. So the one key thing with logic extensions, though, is it is fairly technical. So to me, Orchestrator has always been not all that technical of a tool unless you got into some groovy scripting. If you jump into logic extensions, just be aware it becomes a little bit technical at times. So it has a ton of power once you leverage what it can do or understand what it can do, but it can be a little bit overwhelming at times. So I'm going to go ahead now and just kind of jump back to PowerPoint. All right, so just some tips and tricks, define a standard strategy, break these into chunks. Don't try and take on the world, right? You need to crawl, walk, run with these things. There's a lot of power, but you also can put yourselves in specific situations. If you go and have a bunch of updates happening that shouldn't, and then also change that mindset. So like I talked about earlier, there's a lot of these tools that allow you to break the bounds of what standard JD development used to be. So the way that I like to think about it is before you do a mod, always stop and think, hey, can I use an orchestration to do this? Because it's going to be much easier to manage and promote in the future. So we're at questions. Let me open this up and see if we've got any questions. All right, let's pop this out. Okay, we've got a couple. So the first one is, where's the file outputted to? Yeah, you can control. There is some opportunity to drop it in a specific route. That came out just fairly recently, so there is more control around where these files actually go. So Jen, do you know of any Oracle documentation out there on building an orchestration with CSV files? as the input using. Yeah, Jen, I can send you some documentation on one, using a file, or ultimately not using a file and just dropping it in directly to Orchestrator. Can we insert data into JDE item master table using Orchestrator? Yep, absolutely. So all of Orchestrator can hit any table inside of E1 with any application. You can actually do IOs too, so you can really insert values. But yeah, you can certainly hit the item master table using Orchestrator. Any other questions? Okay, so one thing, just from a offering perspective, we do tons of these Orchestrator workshops. So if you'd like us to come out, whether remote or on site, and just give you a high-level overview of how to build these orchestrations, also give you a deep dive into allowing you to be somewhat self-sufficient on these. That's always the goal. So we come out, we have all the training built out. By the end of it, you'll be an expert, and allow you to utilize those skills moving forward. So please feel free to reach out to us if you want any help with that. We do have the third part of this series coming up. So why move to the 64-bit? So for those of you that don't know, R22 is 64-bit, so you would have to make that move. So David Toll, our Director of Managed Services, is going to be putting on that session. And then also come and please join us out at Blueprint. We're super excited to be in person again. It's been tough the last few years not being able to be around everyone. So please feel free to come see us. I will be there. So please feel free to stop by the booth. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.